Non-functional secondary drain. Emergency closure trigger. I'm issuing a shutdown order. Ward Fenn said it the way a man says something he has already decided is routine. He pointed at the floor drain with his inspection clipboard. He had already started filling out the order form. The order number was written at the top in his careful block numbers before he finished the sentence. Claire Merritt stood in the doorway of her milk room in her work apron and boots, watching him write, and held out her hand for the copy. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She held out her hand. Fenn tore off the copy and gave it to her. She walked to the house. Fenn drove away. Inside, Claire opened the order form on the kitchen table beside the state dairy statute she had pulled from the shelf and 2 binders she had taken down in the 15 minutes before Fenn arrived. She read the citation code on the form. Class 2. She looked up Class 2 in the statute. Class 2, corrective action required within 30 days. No emergency closure authority. She looked at the box Fenn had checked on the order form. Emergency closure authority invoked. Class 2 does not authorize that box. She picked up her phone and called her farm attorney at 2:18 p.m. She said, "He used the wrong tier. Class 2 deficiency doesn't trigger emergency closure. File for a hearing." Her attorney read the order. Then he read the statute. Then he said, "File this afternoon." They filed at 4:47 p.m. But what Ward Fenn didn't know, and had not checked before writing the order, was that Claire Merritt had 180 consecutive clean milk tests over 15 years of operation. Not one violation, not one citation before this morning. And she had both sets of documentation in 2 binders, organized by year, and she had been to every state dairy compliance workshop since 2010, and she knew the classification table the way some people know their own phone number. She knew the box he checked was wrong. She had known it standing in the milkroom doorway. Do you know this feeling? The feeling of watching someone make an error with authority and saying nothing because the hearing room is the right place to say it? But before we get to the hearing, let's go back to 2009 and the morning Claire built the milkroom that passed 180 consecutive inspections. At 7:33 a.m. on a Tuesday in April 2009, a licensed milk plant consultant named Ron Bates walked through the milkroom of Claire Merritt's 38-acre dairy operation west of Keene, New Hampshire, with a clipboard. He had been hired to design the drainage and cooling systems to state Grade A specifications. He spent 3 hours measuring, calculating, specifying. He drew the drainage plan in pencil on graph paper at the kitchen table. He showed Claire each section. He said, "Primary drain, center of the wet zone. Secondary drain, east wall. Both gravity fed to the septic system. Secondary gate valve for isolation." He pointed to the east wall drain. The secondary valve is code required for the raw milk facility license. Annual inspection checks function. Claire said, "What does function mean on an inspection form?" Ron said, "Valve closes fully and opens fully on manual operation. No bypass, no partial closure." She said, "Who verifies that?" He said, "The inspector checks it on the annual visit." She said, "What if the inspector is new and doesn't know what to check?" Ron said, "The inspector should have the classification table. The table tells him what each item means and what the response authority is." She said, "Should." He looked at her. He said, "You're going to be meticulous about this, aren't you?" She said, "Every inspection, every year." He said, "Good." The milk room was built to his specification and passed the first inspection before Claire delivered her first gallon of licensed raw milk in September 2009. The first binder entry was the first inspection report. No deficiencies. She put it in the tab for 2009 and dated it. She passed the next inspection. And the next? 180 consecutive clean tests and inspection reports across 15 years and 5 different assigned inspectors. She attended every state dairy compliance workshop between 2010 and 2023. 9 workshops. She missed none of them because she understood that the regulatory framework could always be used against her if she gave it any opening. And the only way to ensure she gave no opening was to know the framework better than anyone who was inspecting her. She had read the classification table at 3 of the 9 workshops. She had read it at home, in the statute, 2 more times. She knew what Class 1 meant, and what Class 2 meant, and what Class 3 meant, and what the Emergency Closure Authority was designed for. Active contamination events, not potential contamination, not secondary drain valve dysfunction. Active contamination. The drain valve on the east wall had stopped seating fully in October. She had noticed it on her monthly self-check. She did a monthly facility walkthrough. In addition to the state inspections, checking every system on a written checklist, and had flagged it in her maintenance log. She had ordered the replacement part. It was back-ordered from the supplier. She had a 48-hour callback on the order. She had not had the state inspection that week, so she had not worried about it. Fenn arrived on a Thursday. He was on his 3rd visit to the operation in 8 months. The first 2 visits had found nothing. The 3rd found the valve. He had written it up as a Class 2 deficiency, which was the correct classification. Then he had checked the emergency closure box, which was not authorized by Class 2. Claire had watched him make this error in real time. She had said nothing in the milk room. She said it at the hearing. The hearing was in Concord, at the State Health Board offices, in a room with a long table and adjustable chairs, and a court reporter at the far end. 3 board members across the table, Ward Fenn and Claire's attorney on opposite sides, Dr. Patricia Nolan, the state veterinarian who had worked with Claire's operation since 2012, at the table beside Claire. Fenn presented the order. He said the secondary drain valve presented an active contamination risk and that he had acted within his emergency closure authority. The board chair asked him to identify the specific contamination event or risk the drain posed. He said it was a structural deficiency with contamination potential. She asked for the regulatory language that authorized emergency closure for contamination potential rather than active contamination. He said he had applied the authority available to him. She wrote something on her notepad. Dr. Nolan opened the classification table and set it in front of the board. She pointed to the drain deficiency entry. Class 2, corrective action within 30 days. No emergency closure authority. She said, "The drain valve is a secondary isolation mechanism, not a primary drainage barrier. The primary drain was fully functional. There was no active contamination pathway from the valve failure." Fenn looked at the classification table. He looked at his own citation form. He had written Class 2 on the form in his own handwriting. Below it, he had checked the emergency closure authority box. The board chair looked at the citation form. She looked at the classification table. She looked at Fenn. His face went grey, not dramatically, not a collapse. The particular draining of color that comes from seeing clearly the exact distance between what you wrote and what the regulation permitted. His pen was still, his hands were flat on the table. He did not speak. The two neighboring dairy farmers in the gallery, both watching from the back of the room, both with small licensed dairies of their own, both with the focused attention of people who know this could happen to them next, both exhaled at the same moment. Claire, beside Dr. Nolan, was watching Fenn's face. She watched him read the form. She watched him read the table. She watched him understand. She looked at the board chair. The board took a 20-minute recess. When they returned, the chair read the finding. The secondary drain valve deficiency was a Class 2 citation. Class 2 citations required corrective action within 30 days and did not authorize emergency closure. The shutdown order was procedurally deficient and was vacated. The Class 2 citation remained in the record with a 30-day corrective action window, which had already been satisfied. Fenn gathered his materials methodically and left the room before the board finished reading. Claire shook Dr. Nolan's hand. She signed the hearing record. She was back at the farm by 3 o'clock. She was milking by 4. The drain valve had been replaced 2 days after the order, as soon as the back-ordered part arrived. She had replaced it herself in 40 minutes and noted the replacement in the maintenance log. October 18th, secondary drain valve replaced, gate valve now fully functional. The part had cost $104 in materials. The shutdown had cost approximately $6,800 in discarded milk before the hearing reversed it. 15 jerseys milked on schedule, twice daily, every gallon discarded under the legal constraint of the shutdown order. She did not pursue additional remedy for the loss. The order was off the record. That was what she had asked for. The binders went back on the shelf. 2 neighbors called in the following weeks. One was Don Hart, who had watched the entire proceeding from the gallery. He called to say, "Thank you for the demonstration, not the legal victory, the demonstration." He said he had been keeping inspection reports loosely, in a folder, and he was going to buy the same binder system and organize them the way Claire had. He asked what tab structure she used. She described the tab structure. He organized his record over a weekend. The other neighbor was Ellen Sato, who had not been at the hearing, but had heard about it from Don. She called Claire and asked a different question. "Did you know Fenn was wrong when he was writing the order?" Claire said, "Yes." Ellen said, "And you said nothing?" Claire said, "Not at the milk room. The hearing room is the right place. The milk room is not." Ellen was quiet for a moment. She said, "How do you know the difference?" Claire said, "Because at the milk room, I would have been arguing against his authority in his presence, which makes the situation defensive and personal. At the hearing, the classification table speaks for itself. The board reads the table. The board reads the form. The board makes the finding. I don't have to argue. The document argues." Ellen said, "The binders." Claire said, "The binders, the table, the citation form in his own handwriting." She said, "The document always argues better than the person." Ellen said, "I'm going to start keeping binders." She did. Ward Fenn transferred to a different district 8 months after the hearing. His transfer was not announced as connected to the merit proceeding. It was a routine reassignment. He went to the Northern District, where the dairy operations were mostly conventional, and the regulatory interactions were generally less complicated. whether he read the classification table more carefully after the hearing, no one in the Cheshire County District knew. His replacement in Cheshire County, an inspector named Maria Vasquez, who had 12 years of dairy inspection experience and who read the merit case file as part of her district orientation, made her first visit to Claire's operation in March and spent 20 minutes reading the compliance binders before she looked at a single fixture. She said, "I've never seen 15 years organized this way." Claire said, "I learned it from a consultant in 2009. Maria said, "The tab system?" Claire said, "1 tab per year. Within each year, the milk tests in front, the inspection report behind it, and the maintenance log at the back." Maria read 3 years of entries. She made notes. She said, "This is what I'd want every operation in the district to maintain." Claire said, "Tell them." Maria said, "I'll send a template." She did. She sent a documentation template to 11 licensed dairy operations in the Cheshire County District with a note that said, "Consistent documentation is the best protection both for the operation and for the accuracy of the regulatory process." 2 operations adopted the template in the first year, 4 more in the second year. The drain valve on the east wall of Claire's milk room has been replaced once since 2023. Preventive maintenance, not failure. She notes it in the maintenance log. She tabs the receipt. She continues, 181 consecutive clean tests. Continuing, the binders are on the shelf. The jerseys are in the barn. The milk is clean. The record continues. If you have been doing something right for a long time, and someone with a form and an authority has tried to tell you that you haven't, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that the binder matters, that the record matters, that the classification table matters, and that the document argues better than the person. Hit the like button. Subscribe. The next story takes us to Washington State. A hillside orchard above Lake Chelan, 30 years of downgrade forms, and a Japanese buyer who asked one question that changed everything. Let's talk about what 15 years of clean tests actually looks like. It is not the same as 15 years of good luck. It is not the same as 15 years of an inspector who liked you, or 15 years of a regulatory framework that was looking the other way. It is 15 years of specific daily decisions about the milk room, the temperature, the cleaning schedule, the equipment maintenance, the drainage, the herd management that produced every month without fail a milk test result that met the state's standard for Grade A licensed raw milk. Claire has 24 jerseys. She built the herd from 12 in 2009, adding 2 animals a year on a careful schedule, not faster than her management capacity could absorb, not slower than the operation's financial projection required. The jerseys are a deliberate choice. Their butterfat percentage supports a premium price point that makes the economics of a 38-acre licensed raw milk operation work. The butterfat premium is about 12 cents per quart at retail, which does not sound like much until you multiply it across the operation's monthly volume. She manages the herd with the same documentation discipline she applies to the facility. Every cow has a health record. Every treatment is noted. Every test result is in the binder. Not just the monthly bulk tank tests the state requires, but her own monthly individual cow tests, which she began in 2013 when she noticed a variance pattern she wanted to track more carefully. She found the source, A single cow with subclinical mastitis that was not at the threshold for positive test results but was affecting the bulk tank numbers and addressed it. The state would never have caught this. Claire caught it because she was running her own tests. This is the habit that produces 180 consecutive clean results, not the absence of problems. The presence of a system that finds the problems before they become violations. The monthly self-check on the facility systems. The individual cow tests. The maintenance log. The consultation with Dr. Nolan twice a year, well before any inspection, to review the operation's current status and identify anything that might be approaching a compliance threshold. Dr. Nolan had visited in August, 2 months before Fenn's November inspection. She had looked at the milk room, the herd health records, the drainage systems. She had noted that the secondary drain valve was showing some wear, not failure, not dysfunction, just the early signs of the friction that develops in gate valves over time. She had recommended replacement within the next 6 months. Claire had ordered the replacement part in September. It was back-ordered. The November inspection found the valve before the part arrived. This is the detail that matters most when you understand how carefully managed the operation was. The deficiency Fenn found was known to the operation's own veterinary consultant 2 months before he arrived. The corrective action was already in progress. The part was on order. The documentation would have shown all of this. Fenn did not ask about corrective actions in progress. He wrote the order. He checked the wrong box. The hearing room corrected him. At the hearing, Claire's attorney presented the August consultation notes from Dr. Nolan's visit, the recommendation to replace the valve, the timeline. This was additional context beyond the classification table argument, and it demonstrated that the operation had been proactively managing the deficiency rather than ignoring it. The board chair noted this in the finding. Evidence presented shows the deficiency was identified by the operations consulting veterinarian in August, 2 months prior to the inspection, and corrective action was initiated at that time. Proactive management, documented, that is the difference between a facility that is managed carefully and a facility that is managed reactively. Reactive management waits for the inspection to find the problem. Careful management finds the problem first, documents the finding, initiates the correction, and presents the documentation when the inspection asks. Ward Fenn had inspected 2 reactive facilities in his previous 2 districts. He had not inspected a careful facility before Claire's. He had not adjusted his approach accordingly. He should have read the consultation notes before writing the order. He should have read the classification table before checking the box. He should have asked what corrective actions are in progress. He did not. The hearing room asked these questions for him. The board chair read the finding at 2:47 p.m. Claire was back at the farm at 3:12 p.m. The jerseys were milked at 4 p.m. The milk went into the tank for the first time since the shutdown order. It tested clean. Of course it did. It had always been clean. 181 consecutive clean tests. The binders on the shelf recorded every one of them. Let's talk about the hearing room itself, because the hearing room is where this story ends, and it deserves a moment. The State Health Board hearing room in Concord is a small room. The table is not impressive. The chairs are adjustable, but not comfortable. The lighting is fluorescent. It is the kind of room where regulatory decisions happen without ceremony. by people who read forms and consult statutes and make findings based on evidence. It is also the kind of room where, when someone has been right for 15 years and the documentation shows it, the outcome is not in question. The board chair's pen was still when she read the finding. The court reporter's fingers moved. Fenn gathered his materials. The two neighboring farmers in the gallery exhaled. Claire's attorney shook her hand. Nothing dramatic happened. The right thing happened. It happened because Claire had the binders. It happened because she had attended the workshops and read the table and knew the box should not have been checked. It happened because her attorney filed the hearing request in 4 hours and the hearing process worked the way it was designed to work, which is evidence, argument, finding. The classification table is 22 pages. The drain deficiency entry is 6 lines. The entry is clear. The tier is clear. The authorized response is clear. Ward Fenn had not read those 6 lines before writing the order. He has likely read them since. There is a version of this story where Claire goes to the milk room that Thursday morning and argues with Fenn about the classification, where she raises her voice or threatens legal action or says something she regrets. In that version, the emotional energy goes into the argument, and the argument becomes personal, and Fenn becomes defensive, and the regulatory relationship is damaged in ways that are hard to repair. That is not this version. In this version, Claire held out her hand for the copy and walked to the house and read the statute and called her attorney. She was back in the barn by 3 o'clock to do the afternoon milking. The milk she would have to discard under the shutdown, but the milking that the herd needed regardless. She performed the work correctly. She filed the challenge. She appeared at the hearing with her documentation and her consulting veterinarian and her 15 years of clean records and said, "The drain is Class 2. Class 2 does not authorize this box. Here is the table." The document argued. The board agreed. The record prevailed. That is the whole story. If you have been right for a long time, while someone with a form has told you you're wrong, if you have the documentation and you know the regulation and you are waiting for the right room to say it, this story is for you. Share it. Comment below. Tell me about the record you have been keeping and the moment it mattered. Hit the like button. Subscribe. Washington State is next. A hillside orchard, 30 consecutive downgrade forms, and a Japanese buyer who bit into a cherry and asked a question nobody in 30 years had bothered to ask. The two neighboring dairy farmers who watched the proceeding from the gallery were Don Hart and Ellen Sato. Don ran a 30-head conventional dairy 2 miles east of Claire's operation. Ellen ran a 16-head licensed raw milk dairy of her own, 4 miles south, which she had opened in 2017 and which had been through 3 inspections, all clean, and which she had managed with a filing system that she now understood, after watching the merit hearing, was inadequate. She had a folder, one folder, with the inspection reports in it, not separated by year, not with the milk tests, not with the maintenance log. A folder. She called Claire the following week and asked what she needed. Claire described the binder system in detail. 2 binders, 1 working copy, 1 archival. The working copy at the farm, the archival at a secondary location. The tab structure. 1 tab per year, milk tests in the front of each year's tab. Inspection report behind them. Maintenance log at the back. the dating convention for the spine, the reference to the relevant state regulation on the first page of each year's section. Ellen drove to the office supply store and bought 4 binders, 2 working copies and 2 archival, and spent a Saturday organizing 5 years of scattered documentation into the structure. She found that she had missed 3 monthly milk tests. They were in her email inbox, unprinted, and she printed and added them. She found that her 2020 maintenance log was incomplete. She had replaced a compressor gasket in June 2020 and had not documented it. She called the service company and got the invoice and added it to the 2020 section. The maintenance log was now complete. She put the archival binders in a waterproof container in the closet of her farmhouse office, separate from the working binders in the milk room. She called Claire when she was done. She said, "This took most of Saturday." Claire said, "It takes less time each year once you're current." Ellen said, "I should have been doing this from the start." Claire said, "You're doing it now." Ellen said, "Is there anything else?" Claire said, "Go to the workshop, the state dairy compliance workshop. They review the classification table. Go every time they offer it." Ellen said she would. She attended the following year's workshop. She sat in the 3rd row and read the classification table section carefully. She looked at the drain deficiency entry. She read the tier. She read the authorized response. Class 2, corrective action within 30 days, no emergency closure authority. She understood why Claire had not argued in the milk room. She understood why the hearing room was the right place. She wrote in her notes, "Document first, argue second, let the table speak." She went home and checked her secondary drain valve. It was fully functional. She noted it in the maintenance log. One more thing worth saying about Claire Merritt before we close this story. She's 55 years old. She built the raw milk dairy after her husband's death in 2009, which is the fact in her background that the story bends around without dwelling on. She built it from 12 head to 24, over 15 years of careful management. She built it on ground paid for and a future to decide and a set of choices she made clearly and with full information. The way she makes all of her choices. She chose Jersey cows for the butterfat. She chose raw milk for the licensing pathway and the market. She built the milk room to Ron Bates's specification and has maintained it to that specification ever since. She keeps the binders because she knows the regulatory framework can always be used against her if she gives it any opening. She's never given it one. Not in 15 years. Not in 180 consecutive clean tests. Not in one citation before Ward Fenn's Thursday morning. Ward Fenn's order is off the record. The binders are on the shelf. 181 consecutive clean tests. Continuing, she was back at the farm by 3 o'clock. She was milking by 4. The milk is clean. It has always been clean. If you're a small operator, a farm, a food business, a licensed operation of any kind, and you are not keeping your compliance documentation in this kind of order, start today, not next week. Today, 1 binder, 1 tab, this year's records. Start there. Go forward. The argument you don't know is coming will come eventually. When it does, you want the binder. Claire had the binder. It was the most important thing in the room. It was worth 15 years. Comment below about the documentation you keep and why. Share this with a small operator who needs to hear it. Like this video and subscribe so you're here for the next one. Washington State, a steep hillside orchard, 30 years of downgrade forms, and a Japanese buyer who asked one question in July that nobody in 30 years had thought to ask. There is one more thing that happened in the weeks after the hearing that nobody in the district office knew about. Ward Fenn, driving north to his new district assignment in March, stopped at a rest area outside Concord and pulled the state dairy regulations out of his bag. He opened them to the classification table. He read the drain deficiency entry. Class 2. Corrective action within 30 days. No emergency closure authority. He had read this entry before. He had been trained on it in his initial inspector certification. He had passed the written examination that included questions on the classification table. He had marked the correct answer on the exam. Class 2 deficiencies do not authorize emergency closure. He had written the merit order on a Thursday morning in November without consulting the table. He sat at the rest area and read the 6 lines for a long time. He understood what had happened. He had applied an authority he had remembered being available, without checking whether it applied to the specific classification he had just cited. He had remembered that emergency closure existed as an authority. He had not remembered, or had not thought to check, the precise conditions under which it was authorized. He had been wrong. He knew it sitting at the rest area. He had known it in the hearing room. He had known it the moment Claire's attorney said Class 2, and the board chair's pen went still. He was not a bad inspector. He was a careful man who had made a specific error. An error that the classification table would have prevented if he had opened it before writing the order. He was going to open it every time from now on. He was going to look at the citation classification code and find it in the table and read the authorized response before he checked any box. He was not going to make this error again. He closed the regulations. He drove north. He was a better inspector at the end of the merit case than he was at the beginning. This is the honest thing about the story. The part that is easy to miss if you're focusing on the vindication. On Claire's 180 consecutive clean tests. On the finding, read aloud in the hearing room. The honest thing is that the process worked. Claire challenged the order because the order was wrong. The hearing board reviewed the evidence and made the correct finding. Ward Fenn made an error and was corrected. He learned from it. The regulatory process is better because it happened. This is what good institutions do. They have a correction mechanism. The mechanism in this case was Claire Merritt, who knew the table, kept the binders, filed the hearing request in 4 hours, and appeared in the room with the documentation. She was the correction mechanism. She was possible because she had done the work. 15 years of clean tests and organized documentation and workshop attendance and knowing the classification table. All of that made her the mechanism that corrected a procedural error in the state dairy regulatory process. That is not a small thing. The binders are on the shelf. 181 consecutive clean tests. Continuing, the jerseys are in the barn. The milk is clean. And Ward Fenn, somewhere in the Northern District, is opening the classification table before he checks any box. That is a good outcome. That is the whole story. Like this video and subscribe. The next one is coming. 30 years of downgrade forms. A hillside above Lake Chelan. and the man who finally asked what the bricks was. It is coming soon. The milk room. Let's spend a moment in it, because this is where the whole story starts. It is a rectangular room, 18 by 22 feet, with a concrete floor sloped toward the primary center drain. The walls are white epoxy-coated cinder block, cleaned daily with a chlorine solution that Claire mixes to the same concentration every morning. The milk pipeline runs from the parlor through the east wall and terminates at the bulk tank. A 500-gallon horizontal tank, stainless steel, with an agitator and a cooling coil that brings the milk to 38 degrees in under 2 hours. The primary floor drain is in the center of the wet zone. A 4-inch cast iron drain with a removable screen and a sediment trap that Claire cleans weekly. The secondary drain is on the east wall, 18 inches from the base. A 2-inch gate valve that routes to the secondary line running parallel to the primary. The gate valve function, opening fully and closing fully on manual operation, is what Ward Fenn cited. The valve had been seating at approximately 85% closure, not 0%, not leaking actively, seating at 85%. This is the deficiency Ward Fenn identified. It is a real deficiency. Class 2 is the correct classification for a non-functional secondary isolation valve. The corrective action, replace the valve, is straightforward and inexpensive and was already in progress when Fenn arrived. But it was not an emergency. It was not a Class 1 deficiency. It was not an active contamination pathway. The primary drain was fully functional. The milk pipeline was sealed and pressure tested. The bulk tank was maintaining temperature. The herd tests were current. The milk was clean. The classification table said Class 2. Fenn wrote Class 2. Then he checked the emergency closure box. The classification table did not authorize that. The hearing board did not authorize that. The order was vacated. The valve cost $140 in parts. The shutdown cost $6,800 in discarded milk. The difference between those two numbers is the cost of checking the wrong box. The difference between an operation that could fight the wrong box error and an operation that couldn't is 2 binders, 15 years of monthly entries, and a grower who attended every compliance workshop since 2010 and knew the classification table the way some people know the table of contents of their own operation. That is what protection looks like. Not a lawyer on retainer, not a complicated legal structure, not a special dispensation. 2 binders. The correct entry in the correct tab. The knowledge of the 6 lines in the classification table that apply to your specific situation. That is it. That is what Claire had. That is what she will tell you, if you ask. Go to the workshop, read the table, keep the binder. You don't know which year the wrong box error is coming. But when it comes, you need to be the person who knows the answer before they walk into the hearing room. Claire was that person. She had been building toward being that person since 2009. 181 consecutive clean tests, and 1 hearing, and 1 correct finding, and the binders back on the shelf, and the jerseys in the barn, and the milk clean. That is everything. Leave a comment. Subscribe. The next story is Washington State. An orchard, 30 years. A bricks number that the packing house never measured, and the buyer who finally did. The jerseys were milked at 4 o'clock on the day the hearing ended. Claire drove back from Concord, pulled off her coat, and went to the barn in the same boots she had worn to the hearing. The jerseys came in on their schedule. They know the milking time the way they know the feeding time, by the light and the temperature and the movement of the barn. And they were at the parlor gate when she arrived. She put the milking equipment on the first cow. The milk came in clean. Of course it did. It had always been clean. She milked all 24, in order, the way she did every evening, the way she had done every evening for 15 years. The milk went into the tank. The tank cooled it to 38 degrees. The agitator ran. The temperature alarm did not sound. She cleaned the equipment. She walked the milk room. She checked the new drain valve. The replacement had been installed 2 days after the shutdown order, as soon as the back-ordered part arrived. She checked its operation. Closed fully, opened fully, no bypass. She noted it in the maintenance log. She turned off the light. She went to the house. She put the binders back on the shelf. She made dinner. She did not call anyone to celebrate. She did not post anything. She did not feel particularly triumphant, because there was nothing to feel triumphant about. The order had been wrong, and the board had said so, and that was the correct outcome. And correctness is not triumph. It is just the thing that is supposed to happen when the process works. The process had worked. She was glad of it. She went to bed. Tomorrow was a milking day. It was always a milking day. 182 consecutive clean tests, as of the following monthly test. The binders were on the shelf. The record continued.